So, Martin Andrews, welcome to FORTE podcast. It's a pleasure to have you on my podcast on YouTube. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Thank you for inviting me, and I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Me too. I've been looking forward to it since we scheduled it, actually, as I was telling you before. So, I just would like to go back to the genesis, if you may, if you like, of your relationship with architecture.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell me, when did you start to have that desire to study architecture? Or better yet, when did your fascination with architecture start?
Okay, I'll start with the opposite answer.
Sure, yeah.
So if you were able to ask my parents and my sisters about what I was like with the built environment when I was younger, when I was dragged around National Trust properties when we went on holiday, it got to the point where I would say, it's fine, I'll sit in the car while you guys go round wherever the mansion is, or wherever the house is, and I'll keep myself entertained. I wasn't necessarily interested in what was there to look at. The way it was exhibited or the way it was curated didn't help me. So then we were asked at school, probably in my second or third year, so I was 12 or 13, to find a work placement. And I lived in Oxfordshire, in a town called Abingdon, which was on the River Thames. And I didn't know what to do. I didn't know where to go. I think it was for a week. And my sister, who was teaching in Hampshire, said, one of my friends, one of my teaching friends, their husband's an architectural technologist, and he's a director of a practice in Romsey in Hampshire. Would you like to do your work experience there? You'll get to live with the family for the days that you're working in the practice. The person that owned the firm was an architect, was a chartered architect. And I said, okay, I'll give it a go. And it blew my mind. The director, the architectural technologist that I lived with for those few days, had just moved into a house that he had designed and built in and around the villages of Romsey. And the dynamic atmosphere in the practice, the fact that they had just started to use this thing called computer-aided design, that they were hand drawing, that they were model making, that they had a print room, all these things were just amazing. So I came back from that thinking, I want to find out as much as I possibly can about this thing called architecture, whether that's, the architect, the other director, or architectural technology. And I did. And I found out as much as I could, and I realised that actually I wanted to be an architect, not an architectural technologist. And at that time, a technologist could be framed as someone that did the technology of the building, the detailing, whereas the architect was more about the design of the detailing, the design of the building. And I chose my GCSEs so that I could apply for A-levels that would lead me towards studying architecture at university. I chose my A-levels so that I could go to university with the right points and the right background. So it in a way, it comes back to my eldest sister. I had three sisters. One sadly passed away, but my eldest sister was the one that said, come and stay with this practitioner. So that was it. That was the moment for me, was walking into this practice as I'm sure I might have been 13, I may have even just been 12, and having my world turned upside down. And it was in a good way, in a really, really good way. And that was the first time I'd been introduced to the studio as such, this place where everybody worked together and shared ideas. So yeah, that was the moment for me.
And what was your mentor like? Can you tell us what he or she taught you? And what did you do when you were doing your...
When I was there, I did a little bit of everything. So I did a bit of model making. I did a bit of sketching. I did a bit of this CAD stuff that people were talking about, computer-aided design. I did printing in the print room, which was amazing because those machines were like tanks. They were massive back then, not like these lovely digital pieces that we've got now. So I was introduced to everything. The director, the technologist, was quite a character. Spoke very openly about the construction industry and the relationship between architects and architectural technologists at that time, and allowed me to follow him onto the building sites as well. So it wasn't just office space. We went and saw buildings in construction. We went and talked to clients as well. So in the week or so, I think it was about 5 days that I was with that practice, I was introduced into lots of different things. So the nice thing for me was to see that actually architecture might not just be about sitting at a desk doing a drawing. It could be all these interpersonal things, crafting, manual work, a bit of computer work, so it was this really nice mixture. So
I just want to go in a slight tangent before we track back to your previous early relationship with architecture. Is when you said that the machine was like a tank.
Yeah.
And now these days it's sort of gotten smaller and smaller and smaller.
Mm-hmm.
I was speaking to an old classmate of mine who's now a marine engineer. So he fixes boats, he fixes yachts as well. And I was asking about technology and the development of technology.
Mm-hmm.
And he's the kind of guy that rejects all contemporary forms of technology. So, for example, microchips, iPhones where you don't even see what's going on inside, things like quantum physics, stuff like that. I know that's not in the mobile phones, but stuff you cannot see happening and happens in the blink of an eye. He doesn't trust that.
Okay.
He says he prefers technology where you can see all the bits and bobs moving and interacting with each other.
Mm-hmm.
And he said that it gives him this psychological reassurance that things are working and things he can see, gives him that sort of sense of security.
Mm-hmm.
And I wondered, did you have any thoughts on that? I just wanted to pick up on your comparison between the things that were huge and now things are inconceivably small.
Okay. So when I was being trained up until my undergraduate studies, everything was manual. So there's a drawing board, there's pens of different thicknesses to draw your line weights, a scalpel, a metal ruler, a cutting board. If you made a mistake, depending on who you were doing the drawing for, you would probably have to redraw the whole drawing. That was even the same through my sort of diploma in architecture as well, which was postgraduate studies. And then I went into practice. So you'd have a year out between your undergraduate and your postgraduate studies. And I was again introduced to CAD, to computer-aided technology, where if you made a mistake on the screen, you deleted it and you printed it again. For me, the technology side of the production of architecture, so I'm talking about the sort of the creation of, the drawing of, has been made more efficient by being able to use a computer. The wasted time, for me anyway, at least, of having to redraw things to try and aim for that piece of perfection before it's pinned up in front of a jury of tutors, or before you pin it up in front of a client to describe your ideas. That time, which was very labour intensive to draw, has, I think, disappeared. So students that I teach now don't have to go through that whole redrawing because of a mistake. So there's been an efficiency in that, which allows you to spend more time thinking about the creative things, thinking about what the client wants, thinking about what type of materials you want to produce the building from. So that wasted time and effort, and it did, if I'm being honest, it was a very frustrating. Let me give you an example. I was preparing drawings for a portfolio when I was a student. So I was going through these big sheets on the drawing board, and each time I finished a sheet, I'd put it down. And it was late. I'd been doing it a long time. It was labour intensive, as I said, and I put one sheet down and I rolled my chair back across all of the sheets so that my adjustable chair had rollers, wheels. What do you do in that instance where you have a presentation to give, possibly the next day? I think it was the next day. And you now have sheets that you can't pin up. That it's quite catastrophic sitting there in your dining room with a drawing board in front of you and maybe 6 or 7 crushed drawings underneath your chair. What do you do? Well, you can't press print because you're manually drawing them, so you have to draw them again. That I find to be wasted time, wasted effort, wasted cognitive process. So now my students probably don't have to do that anymore. If there's a mistake, it's quicker. Therefore, you've got more time to do other things or have free time or do something that is, more productive. So I think, technology is very, very beneficial for architecture. And that's just the production of the drawings. That's not even talking about things that are produced on site, things that are produced off site that are then craned into position and fixed together. So I think, I don't know, your colleague, your friend that you described, I think I've got a different view. I don't need to see the mechanics. I don't need to see the things that are moving to trust it. I suppose I have to trust what's going on because it's vital. Yeah.
Do you think there's any positives going back to traditional ways of doing things as an option?
Yeah.
As a thing, as a sort of not like a luxury, but I guess to force a new perspective on what you're doing.
Yes. So I like to learn through doing, physical doing, particularly if you're in a meeting with a client or a student. It's really good to sort of pick up your pen, grab a sheet of paper and draw. It's intuitive, it's descriptive, and it's quick. It's a lot quicker than if you were to hold the person. Wait a minute, let me just open up the computer. Let me just type let me draw a few lines. So the manual can be fantastic, really quick to get your ideas across. In the point where we were in lockdown and we were teaching studio digitally, I swapped that manual to a digital pencil and a tablet so that I could transfer through the screen, but still by hand. It wasn't through CAD. So I think, yes, the way I've learned is a combination of the manual and the technical, so the technological. So you get something that's hybrid. And I like to think that combination is sort of the ideal. So there's a bit of craft, there's a bit of technology mixed together, and it's beneficial for everyone.
I like to just tackle assumptions. So in your own terms, what is an architect?
Deep question for a Friday morning. Okay. A person who designs and creates a building or a space, a series of spaces that connect together. So that could be interior design. That could be a piece of furniture. That could be the exterior of a building. It could be a facade. But the way architects are trained, they are able to take on board many things in order to create something that can be used within the built environment. So for me, that's an architect. Now, whether that creator of buildings or the creator of spaces has gone through a 7-year training period at a higher education establishment, or whether they are just a designer of buildings, I don't think that really matters. I think you can become there. There are instances of architects in history who haven't gone to university and have still created fantastic buildings that have come from backgrounds which aren't traditional construction, but have still been able to create these beautiful things. So yeah, I think a creator of buildings and spaces would be my definition.
And you said beautiful buildings. What constitutes a beautiful building for you, or a beautiful space inside a building? When you walk in, what do you notice as a trained architect?
My views changed over time. I think we're influenced by the culture that we are immersed in. So if we go back to the sort of the National Trust properties when I was a child, I liked the size. I liked the tall ceilings. I liked the light that came in to those rooms in these mansions. As I zoom forward to probably my second year of study at university, I had tutors that were very into minimalism and brutalism. So because they were mentoring me, I became very interested in that. So when I visited public buildings or architects' offices that were simple and clean and minimal, I appreciated those. I thought it was amazing. But then you go through, I'm very lucky, I sort of refurbished a building to become my office back when I was practicing and I ran my own business, and I wanted the space to be clean and simple, and I wanted all of the files to be, the lever arch folders to be white, so they were on a shelf. And then I have children, and my world gets turned upside down, and there's clutter and there's untidiness, and we don't have enough storage space to put away our things. So that idea of the perfect space, of minimalism, disappears. You become comfortable in the surroundings that you're in control of. You become comfortable with Lego on the floor. You become comfortable with the books not perfectly lined on the bookshelf. So I think, for me, my view of what is a beautiful space has changed. Now I'm sure it will change again when my children leave home. My wife and I will probably be back to that position where we're in control of our spaces. I said to you earlier, I'm in that process, that very strange process of selling my house, or selling our house. And everything's gone back to being tidy again, because you know that people are going to come round and look at your house, and it feels odd. And I compare myself to when I was 20, 21, 22 and think, but I was so passionate about clearing everything away and making sure it was tidy. But now look at me 20 plus years later. So I think it changes. I see things in spaces. I see things in buildings and furniture now differently. And I think if a certain environment makes you feel happy, makes you feel comfortable, that's great. That's really good. But to try and strive for the architectural perfection of minimalism, I think is beyond me at the moment. I mean, maybe I'll get back to that. I don't know. But I think your view changes. I think everyone has a particular view about what they see. We all see things differently. So for me to come in and say, I only like pink buildings. Pink buildings are the only thing, it's like, I don't know. I'm more mature than that now. I think everyone likes different things, and that's fine. So.
At different times too.
Absolutely. Different times in their lives. You're shaped by the people and the things that surround you, and those people and things change over time. And your viewpoint, your I don't want to use this word, but I will, your ontology changes. And you change and you adapt. You become a different person, and you change and you adapt. So, yeah.
What's your relationship with interior design?
My relationship with interior design has changed over time. When you're training to be an architect, when you're an architecture student, interior design is one of the things that you're taught to do. It's a component part. So if you think of the outside of the building, You think of the construction of a building, you think of the interior, the materials, the colour. You are taught to be, we talked about this as well, it's the generalist approach. Okay. And then you find expertise in something to do with architecture. For me, it was the design of educational buildings for school children. Okay.
Yeah.
And within that is an interior component, and you design the interior. I was fortunate enough to, there are 2 courses taught at the University of Portsmouth School of Architecture. There's the architecture course and there's the interior architecture and design course. And a few years ago, I was invited to come and be part of the team for the interior architecture and design course. And again, it changed my mind. The expertise that colleagues, specifically who come from an interiors background, have, it was beyond anything that I had been exposed to or that I had been provided with the education to understand. And then I find myself a few years ago as the sort of joint course leader for interior architecture and design. I'm teaching students and I'm working with colleagues who have a particular view about interior space. And I had to change how I thought about interior design as being a component of the bigger building that you're designing to something that is specifically, it's the project, it's an interior project, you're doing a series of spaces. So again, I've had to adapt and I've had to learn lots of new things. It was brilliant, it was fantastic. So my relationship with interior design has been a developmental, probably definitely over the past 5 or 6 years. And I really welcomed that opportunity to go into teach interiors and see if I could position myself differently from just being an architect to being an architect who also teaches interior architecture and design. So yeah.
What's your approach to teaching?
Okay. I didn't have a fantastically good time at school. I struggled quite a lot back when I was being taught in the 80s and the 90s and into the very early noughties for architecture for postgrad. It was quite didactic and it was very memory based. Here are facts, learn them. That's okay, I'm all right. I've got a relatively good memory for things like that. I probably, because I'm the youngest of 4 children, I didn't like being told what to do. I just pushed back against that all the time. And because I didn't necessarily like being told what to do, I found it took me quite a long time to find myself as a designer. And it really wasn't until I set up on my own in an architectural practice in 2005. I set up my own business in Winchester. And it was at that point where I didn't have anyone else around me to tell me what to do. I had a series of fantastic clients. I had family that were close to me that I could talk about things with, but not really specific to architecture. And I had to think about how I learnt and how I was going to impart that knowledge to other people, to clients. At about the same time as setting up my own business, I came over and taught part-time at the University of Portsmouth School of Architecture. And I had to think about how was I taught? How did I learn? What didn't work for me? And how could I work with students who are undergraduate or postgraduate? Later on in my architect educated career, I taught postgraduate. And you sit there and you think about it, because there's no real literature out there to tell you how to teach design subjects. It's very tricky to find out. So you teach through intuition, gut feeling, and you teach because of the way you've been taught by others. So I sat there this is a number of years. You teach and you reflect and you teach and you reflect. And I thought, I really don't want to teach students the way that I was taught. And I felt, particularly when I was at school, no one listened to me. Nobody really took on board what I was trying to speak about. People always said, no, carry on. So I like to think that I listen a lot to the students, particularly in design studio. You have to find yourself. I've already said that about when I went out into practice. By that time, I'd been through university. I'd qualified as an architect. I'd worked in multiple design practices, and I still was sat there on the first day of my business being established thinking, what do I do? How do I do this? I'm on my own now. And that's the same sort of thing, is giving the students the confidence to try things, to experiment with things, to not get it right. It's okay not to get it right. To learn how to communicate through drawings or conversation. So it's that idea that you're facilitating learning by being supportive. Didactic teaching, being told what to do, learning it, didn't work for me, and I don't think it works for design students either. So I've tried not to be like that. Obviously, there are parts of architecture education which you need to say, these are facts. You need to learn them in order to help you in your practice, whether that's, structural design questions, structural engineering questions, or professional practice or risk assessment. Yeah, of course, there's things that you need to learn, but the studio-based stuff is, here's a problem, try and solve the problem. Here are some tools for solving that problem that have worked for me. They might not work for you. So I think that's a really long answer to your question, but I think that's the way I like to teach, is to be supportive and to share my experiences, which aren't always good, of how I was taught. So.
Well, it seems like we have very similar experiences growing up with education as well. I think I reacted very negatively to rote learning and to memorization without actually engaging with the material that you're taught, putting it in different contexts for yourself to understand. I wasn't taught any of this. I was just taught, this is the context, you have to learn it, memorize it, and that's it. And then when it comes to a different environment where you have to apply the same knowledge, you can't do it because you were ingrained to do it in that specific context. So I feel like we had the same experience.
Yeah.
But I just want to pick on something you said. You said that people didn't listen to you.
Mm-hmm.
Were these classmates or were these teachers?
No. So particularly secondary school teachers. Which is frustrating. And as a sort of being in the education space now and teaching, it must have been very hard for my secondary school teachers to control a class of approximately 30 in short 45-minute sessions, maybe. The double classes were longer, obviously. But I think a lot of the school I went to was full of very different types of learners, different types of school pupils. So I think the not listening may have come down to sort of riot control, really, is that whole thing of there's a syllabus, we've been asked to teach this. Okay, I just need to teach this stuff. And looking back now, those teachers, those educators were probably quite young. They were probably, in their 20s, probably in their 30s, and maybe didn't have the skills to be able to enter into a conversation with someone like me who was probably overly aggressive, probably didn't really want to listen to what people were saying. So yeah, it was never classmates. And when I came to university to study, I'm still in contact now with a lot of the guys that we studied architecture together. It's an incredible support network, because you go through such difficult times when you have to draw your drawings and pin them up and describe what you've done to an audience of peers and academics and educators. It's a real life-changing. You open yourself up in the public realm to criticism, constructive criticism sometimes, negative criticism sometimes, and it's a shared experience. So classmates, well, let's call them studio mates, without them, to do that as a lonely experience would have been awful, would have been really bad. But to be able to finish the critique, the jury, and then go, oh, was it as bad for you as it was for me? it was brilliant. It's really good. So,
is architecture inherently a collective thing, or can you be a sort of a lone architect doing a project? Or
So I think I've worked for architects with their own small practices who have been very content designing for a client, working with the client, the engineer, the quantity surveyor, the builder, the contractor, and producing something. And I've worked now, in community projects where there are people that aren't from construction backgrounds that give fantastic, insights into what a building or what a space should be. I think to answer your question, I don't think architects or designers can practice independently unless they're very wealthy and they're doing their own design projects where they are. And building their projects as well, so they're client, contractor, designer. You work with people, whether that's you design a business card for someone, you're still working with someone. So I don't think it is a lone profession. That's what I love about architecture is the fact that you get to talk to people about stuff and you create things, and maybe you can see things differently. Maybe the client that you work for can't see the spaces in their minds, and you're able to do something and show them something that they can't see, whether that's a sketch, a model, a three-dimensional drawing on computer. So that relationship, particularly with clients, is brilliant. It's really, really good.
Yeah.
So.
That reminds me, what you just said about showing clients what they can't see. It reminds me of someone. It was a piano technician, actually. He said that anyone, this is related to anyone who works with clients, is that a good technician or anyone who's working with clients is the one who is able to fulfill the client's wants. But an exceptional technician or someone who works with clients is a person who makes the client realize that they have needs that they haven't even realized they had.
Yeah, I agree. I was, after running my business in Winchester, I was asked, I interviewed for, but I was asked to set up an architectural practice at the School of Architecture here at the University of Portsmouth. And I started working with clients from charitable organisations, from commercial organisations, who had a brief. And my role was to connect them with students. It's called live projects, real clients. It was great because our students got to learn their practice. Whether they were interior design students or architecture students, they'd get to, in a safe environment, they'd get to talk to clients. And so many times a client has come to us and said, this is my brief. Okay, we won't be operating the same as an architectural practice, so I can guarantee you, and it's not an apology, but I can guarantee you now that the students won't necessarily stick to your brief. And we would come to an agreement at the beginning of the project that that's okay, that's all right, that's fine. And by the end of the project, after the students had presented their work, their ideas to the clients, nearly every time's the wrong thing to say, nearly every time the client would say to me, I didn't see that when I wrote the brief. I didn't even think about that thing going there, or that material, or that people coming into my building would think like that. And that is, yeah, absolutely. That being able to not forcefully, but in a very open way, being able to say to clients, okay, there might be something else you haven't thought about, is brilliant. To see that change in the clients and the students actually as well, to be able to see that their work is recognised by a real person, a non-academic who values their work is just brilliant. It's really, really good. So yes, I agree with what you said about your technician.
And also making a lasting impression as well.
Yeah, no, definitely. Yeah.
For sure. what are the factors you have to take into account when you're designing a building?
They're so wide ranging. I think the thing that underpins everything,
Yeah.
that if you go back to your last question, and unless you are a very wealthy architect who does everything for themselves, you are driven by the client brief. So you are negotiating all the time between what the client wants, because it's their money, it's their budget. Sometimes it's their clients that they've written the brief for, because they want their building or their space to be used in a particular way. You're negotiating between that brief that you know through experience and research and conversation that brief might, by the end of the project, need change. So I think, that is the thing that underlies everything. I've never been the architect or the designer to go, thank you for your brief, I've produced this. And then I imagine you would spend your time trying really hard to convince the client that your idea is better than theirs. It's not like that. It's not even about negotiation, because it's the client's project, it's the client's money. It's that idea of saying, I think, there are options here. And this is when we were doing the live projects with the real clients, with the students. The students would do options appraisals. They would go, right, okay, this is your brief. This is what it would look like. Okay, this is option 2. Slightly different. It's got all your brief in it. However, here's option 3. And one client of mine, who is quite senior in the Diocese of Portsmouth, said he described working with the students and seeing all their work as being like the Woolworths pick and mix. You're probably too young to remember.
I still remember
Okay. So as a child in Abingdon, I used to go into Woolworths occasionally, and on the back wall was that you could pick the sweets, put them in a bag, so you could choose, all different types, whatever you felt like, and then you'd put it together and you'd have this sort of combination. And that's what this senior member of staff at the Diocese of Portsmouth said it was like working with the students. It was like, I'd never thought of that. So I like a bit of that and a bit of that. And to avoid a design car crash where there's things that really maybe don't go together very well, the job of the designer, the interior design student, the architecture student, is to go, okay, maybe there's another option where we can bring all this stuff together. So I think to answer your question, the architect needs to know lots and lots of things. Codes of practice, regulations, design skills, technologies, how a building goes together, how a contractor or a subcontractor works with those materials on site, all of those things. But the underlying thing that connects it all together is that brief that you're working with with your client. It needs to fulfill their needs. And when you're working with charities like we have done and how we do, that becomes so important.
Yeah.
You can't waste money.
Yeah.
The clients that you're working for have particular needs, and they need to be satisfied in with a high level of design skill, within budget, within time scale.
Yeah.
So it's a negotiation, but
So just to clarify, with a helpful diagram would be that, so you have the brief here, the original client brief, and you give them options. So that sprouts at least, let's say 3 branches. There's 3 options of what the client can do if the original brief is not suitable. If the client has very specific needs, then the further 3 branch off into more options. So it keeps sort of building.
Yeah.
That's a lot of variations on one brief. I think that's...
You'll hear about design education being about iteration. So you do something, you discuss, you change, you design, you discuss, you change. And obviously, because you're working within a time frame, you have to be skilled enough to be able to say, right, there are design freezes here. So we need to help clients make decisions by certain points in order to allow the building to be completed on time or within budget. So you, as an architect or as a designer, need to be very aware of that as you go through the process. And as you become more skilled, as you become more practiced, you're able to do that quicker, to take the client through the journey. But you, as a designer or as an architect, only learn that over time. So as a novice architect, so as an architect who's just qualified, maybe you don't have the same experience. So it's iteration, but it's also experience as well. So.
Yeah. I have to ask a final question now. I wish we could talk much longer. Why do you do what you do?
It's changed. Ontology. Right. So when I came into this, I wanted, as coming out of that, as a 12, 13-year-old being exposed to architecture and design for the first time, I wanted to create buildings because I wanted to see things physically appear that I had helped to design and create. I was very, very happy doing that. And then as you go away from academia and you go into practice, you start working with people, with clients. And I was very fortunate in that sort of placement year between my undergraduate and postgraduate studies to work with domestic residential projects. So I was dealing with homeowners, and it was just very good, very personal. You know, you are spending their money to give them the project that they want. And then I'd always wanted to work for Hampshire County Architects, who at the time of when I was qualifying were renowned for designing schools. I just wanted to do that. So I was fortunate enough to interview, and after my postgraduate studies I went and worked in Winchester, Hampshire County Architects. And I found myself working in special educational needs schools, designing spaces, extensions, improvements to buildings. And I had to work so closely with the children, and you realise that becomes the driver of what you're doing. It's lovely working with primary school children, secondary school children, special educational needs children, because it adds this thing to what you do. There's a meaning to it that goes beyond just you sitting there and sketching something because you need to create a school hall, or, it becomes, wow, these users are so important. It's not a single client. It becomes the client, let's say the head teacher, and the building users. And these building users are lovely because there are so many of them, and they're in their formative years, and they might not actually fully understand the spaces that you design for them. And then I come to work at the University of Portsmouth, where again I'm working with students who are in the very early stages of their careers, and I get to work with charitable clients who inhabit the spaces that we, the students and I, are designing for them. And you realise that actually it's about those people. It's about their particular needs and requirements. Some of them are very, very special, very specialised. That's why I do what I do, whether that's helping the students that I work with to become better designers, to through me sharing experience with them, or guiding them to find their own path, their own route, or working with clients and trying to tease out from them what they need within the parameters of the brief. So that's why I do what I do. I like talking, I like sharing, I like communicating. I like the whole process, and being an architect, although I'm not teaching like I was now, I've sort of assumed a different position at the university. I think my training as an architect and as an architect academic now helps me in the other things that I do.
Martin, Andrew, thank you very much.
Thank you very much for having me.